This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 54.
Even if you can't be the legwork, maybe you're not great at structure, maybe you're not great at being creative, but you have something else to contribute, you can easily get into a group of people that want to make that time at school super memorable for kids.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Mr. Matt. Just give me some more Rogers. Matt, what's going on? How you doing today?
We are doing just fine, hanging in there. I'm happy to be sitting on the other side of a mic with you tonight. So, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I never have a bad day. Never do.
I could see that.
You know, I heard on a podcast, a guy talked about just motivation, goal setting, and how he was in a really, really dark place at one point in his life. And he started to tell himself, I never have bad days. And he would wake up like every morning, say it to himself multiple times a day. And then 2 months later, he was like at a convenience store checkout, and the person asked him, how are you doing today? And he instinctively responded without thinking, I never have a bad day. And he said he's never had a bad day since. And that just like became part of who he was. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But you know, we're recording this mid-January 2022, and this is a tough year. It's a very tough year in education. Teachers are feeling the pressure. There's just a lot obviously going on with the pandemic, just responsibilities of being a 21st century teacher. And so we kind of want to jump into the topic of deciding what to take on, what not to take on, because, you know, as the quote says behind me, for those of you watching on YouTube, a teacher's responsibility extends well beyond the classroom. And I'm not just talking about grading papers and lesson planning. There are committees, there are clubs, there are coaching, there's so many taking grad classes. There's so many things that we can do that we either have to do, we are voluntold that we should be a part of, we volunteer to be a part of, and evaluating what to do, when to do it, what to say no to is extremely difficult, especially as a new teacher, because we feel the need to be scrappy to kind of pick everything up. So Matt, when you first started your full-time position, what were things that you were involved in outside of being a classroom teacher when it's the hardest to be a classroom teacher as a newbie?
So I heard early on that I had to make myself indispensable. I think that was what my advisor said, and I don't know if that was, hey, I'm not sure, kid, if you're cut out to really be a teacher, so make yourself useful in other ways, or you know what, you're low man on the totem pole. And when I was hired, it was quite a bit different than it is today. Very difficult.
To kind of add that, sorry to cut you off. It was incredibly competitive when you and I graduated college. I mean, I subbed for an entire year, got a long-term sub job for a couple months in that first year. And to get hired, I went around to elementary schools, dropping my resume off in person, wearing a suit in the middle of July, just to try to get noticed to get an interview. And so, you know, the teaching pool was massive then. And so it was extremely competitive when we first started. So sorry. Continue.
Yeah, no, you're fine. So I think long-term sub positions were plentiful available, but it was the contracted position that was really difficult to get. And not that a contract position is easy to get today. It's just a little bit more available. doesn't mean anything different about the pool of who's applying or the teachers coming out. But with that being said, I joined anything that someone came to me and said, hey, you would be a good fit for this. So that included things like a science explorers club that would meet after school. I assisted with band and chorus playing drums to help with their performances. I was a middle school assistant to the assistant soccer coach of the girls team. Like I essentially just made sure the balls were inflated and pennies, like anything anyone came to me with, hey, I need a sub. We had a ski club at the time, and I was helping with the middle school, the high school, and the elementary school. I was living at school. And to be honest, as a new teacher, I almost was prioritizing all those other responsibilities, maybe evenly with my own teaching. I didn't know that I wasn't necessarily putting the time into my teaching as much as I probably should have been. I just knew that I was busy and involved, and um, that has changed through the years. That's what I would say.
Yeah, for sure. It's a it's an interesting time, like you said. I don't know that I had anyone explicitly tell me make yourself indispensable, but I definitely had that attitude and mentality. My first year, I'm trying to think back on what I was a part of. Wasn't the same, like you were, just because I'm in a larger district. So, as an elementary teacher, I straight up could not coach. It just wasn't an option. Being a part of those clubs, not an option. But, I was definitely I know I was on committees for the school theme, school assemblies. But my second year, when we had a new principal start, who was my principal for about 7 years, after the first faculty meeting, he was introduced. So he wasn't even officially our principal yet, but he was introduced to the faculty. I knew somewhat of his background just because of common colleagues and some of his interests, and I knew technology was big for him. And at that time, technology was scarce in our district. And, to put it into context, I was hired in 2012, and my hiring principal showed me the projector that had been installed in the ceiling in my classroom for the first time. So, this is the following school year that this new principal is getting hired. And I walked up to him and said, if you ever want to try anything with technology, come to me and I will pilot anything for you. And so, that quickly spread from me being his guinea pig to me being the district guinea pig for so much. My second year, I was training the entire elementary staff on how to use Microsoft because we had transitioned from Mac OS. And so, it was, I think, my go-getter attitude. But like you said, how much was I prioritizing that in comparison to preparing for my lessons and teaching in a position that I was relatively new to? So, if you could go back to Mr. Rogers year one, Mr. Rogers year two, what would you say? Would you say be scrappier? Would you say you have to do it, suck it up? Would you tell him to do less? What would that advice be?
I I definitely benefited from the tough conversations that happened early in my career. And I wonder how close I was to I don't think I was never written up for anything in those early years. I had a principal that had mentioned, "Hey, we should probably get on some sort of system to make sure that curriculum is following the scope and sequence, just like checking in a little bit more frequently." And I had a few chances to kind of realign, but those ended up being shocks to the system. I think early on, feeling busy can easily be confused for doing work, purposeful work. And so I was busy. My first week, I remember kind of a similar thing. We just hadn't had smart boards installed, and I knew no one in the staff. But I said, "Hey, if you want to learn it with me, I'm going to figure it out after school today." I had two or three teachers come by, and I still have teachers saying, like, "Hey, I remember that day that I first met you, and you taught me how to I don't know, write on a smartboard or turn it on even. And so that was a connection that I don't, um, I'm embarrassed when I look back, like we all are when we look back to early teaching days, but I don't necessarily regret the decisions I made because I learned the hard way what hard work looks like. And I think if I'd been skating along and hadn't had those near catastrophes happen, good advisors and colleagues to guide me along the way, I don't think that I would be able to speak as confidently in my classroom these days. But Ken, I think when we look at the different generations of teachers, and I think we both hope to enter the twilight phase of teaching in some capacity, the end of our career, there are definitely different responsibilities at different stages of education. And I thought, tonight's podcast would be a perfect time to talk about what are those responsibilities. We all know what they can be, but what goes into really thinking, hey, this is a good decision for me. I can tell you that in year 6, I made a transition from special ed into regular ed. And I changed buildings during that time. And because of that, I reinstalled that scrappiness of doing anything. I mean, I was the MC at assemblies. I was attending every PTO and PTC meeting. I was roller skating on the weekends for fundraisers. I was doing anything and everything because I wanted to be ingrained in the community. I was going to birthday party, everything, soccer matches, ballet, all of it. And I want to say it was year 9. I had a colleague say, like, you also need to have a life too. You need, it's okay to have a balance, and that the traditional work to live or live to work type mindset only recently came into my brain as a possibility. And it's a hard judgment call right there. But we also have these unspoken responsibilities that we feel. I mean, right now, I feel a different responsibility because I think I know what I'm talking about in curriculum. And I have something to give with behavior management and creative teaching practices and formative assessment ideas. And you know what? Project-based learning. I feel like I have something to actually talk about with multiple years products to back it up to solidify my approach. And I can save that for myself or share it elsewhere.
Yeah, I would say, speaking to those multiple generations, I think, and we're going to kind of get into, at least our opinion on how and why you decide on what to do and what not to do. But I think that generational piece is not only your where you are in your tenure of teaching, but what's going on with your family. You and I are on pretty similar planes in terms of teaching experience, but I have 3 kids and you don't, and so our family dynamics are very different. You have personal things going on and I don't. There's always, you have to look at yourself as a person to decide in that moment or for the year what makes the most sense. I mean, the amount of responsibility that I took on prior to having my son was insane compared to what I would do now. Being in an instructional coach position, I'm not ingrained in a school, so it's a little bit different. But regardless, I would not take on the amount of responsibility that I did because I think one of my most important jobs right now is to be home as much as I can. And in our district, I think technically somewhere, if you look in the contract, we're obligated to attend 2 after school activities, whatever those may be, and it's the principal's job to track that. And our principal said, listen, as long as we pull our weight as a school, as long as there's representation at the family nights and the movie nights, and like those are the things that we are responsible for being at. He said, I'm never going to track who's at what. He said, because our newer teachers that don't have kids and as extensive families and those extra responsibilities, like, you got to step up and do it. And those of you that have kids that are now in high school or in college, you got to step up and do it, because you don't have that pull coming from you at home. And it's not like he went through and said, all right, how many kids do you have? Like, it was just that idea of, let's be a cohesive unit as a school. And if you feel you can step up, step up. And if you feel that you can't, don't feel like you have to carry that burden. And so, I think it's really important to just evaluate where you are, both personally, with your family, with your extra responsibilities. But, it obviously does kind of match the ebbs and flows of a teaching career for most of our teachers that, start after college. You're coming back after a career, it's a little bit different, but, I think it's really important to kind of to put all that into perspective as you're making those decisions.
Totally. And the one disclaimer before we really get into this is, as Ken started the episode, it's a different year. I mean, we've been dealing with a lot. So I know even myself, who feels pretty involved in my school community, have taken noticeable steps back from those responsibilities, because some days it takes all my energy to get to 350 at the end of the day and be able to walk out with the kids and leave a ton of grading in my backpack, and that doesn't get done, and that's okay too. That might be the cap of what I can handle right now. But the ultimate goal is, as we get back to normal, hopefully sooner than later, that doesn't mean that we forget about those opportunities. Because I view, and Ken, I know we've mentioned on the podcast before, when you get to see kids other than the time that they're sitting behind your desk doing your work, is when you get to connect with kids at a totally different level. Not only is it the kids seeing you, but you get to really know the kids so much differently. And I'm not sitting here. I'm still waiting for, a National Honor Society kid to call me up to go to their presentation as an inspirational teacher in their career. I just had students in the high school like 2 years ago. So, I mean, that'll happen eventually. I can't wait for confirmation that I did a great job teaching for that. Going to these community events, going to these school-wide celebrations, and seeing the kids have fun in their natural environment, you get so much positive feedback from that. Parents, that makes a huge difference too, especially as a new teacher. If you're involved, parents are requesting you, regardless of what your experience is. They know that you care about kids. And I think that's the theme through all of this, that we got in this business because we care about kids, and how do you continue to do that and support kids being the best version of themselves. So that's just my little disclaimer.
Yeah, I totally agree with seeing the kids in a different light. It's I just thought back to the news studio that I built from scratch and ran for so many years at Siler. Those, I have connections with students that were in my homeroom that I had a different connection with, and then others that weren't in my homeroom. And even when I see them now as middle schoolers, as high schoolers, there's just that special bond of something different that we did. So it's a really good point that I think we'll probably circle back to. So right now, if a new club opens up or there's a new opportunity, what is what's kind of your filter, your evaluation to decide if you should do it or not? Whether you're being asked or there's just a general email that goes out and says, hey, we're looking for these 5 people, let us know if you're interested. How are you going through that evaluation?
That is a very common question that gets asked, usually at the beginning of every school year, beginning of every season. So first off, what you mentioned, as an elementary teacher, I cannot be a coach, a head coach. They practice before we dismiss, and I'm in a position that I can't leave my kids early. When I taught special ed, I could leave a little bit earlier. And there's ways to work around it. If I was a varsity level coach, Unless Peck Wavering's track and field, I am not qualified to be a varsity coach in any of those ways. But there's a few things to consider. Obviously, as Ken, you mentioned, the family side of thing and the life side of thing. We as early teachers are emphasized to get our master's degree or at least get our permanent certification within the first 6 years. So if you're dealing with that, I think that's a hard balance, right? What you've got is in the first few years, you're trying to get acclimated of how to do teaching. You also have to get through all of your grad credits so that you can move into that permanent certification. And then fast forward, then you have your completed master's degree and you're in Ken and my situation, married. I've got 2 fur children. He has 3 actual human children. So life can come at you really quick. So all of that to say, if it's a topic that interests you, that will bring you extra joy, or it will benefit you to do your classroom job better, that's the first thing. If you're even interested, there's no benefit in jumping something that's not interesting to you. I know that happens. Sometimes kids will be like, I need a sponsor. I need someone who's just willing to say that they're going to be the supervisor. Okay. And then it just comes down to, what does that work actually look like? If all I have to do is sit in my room and I can grade while they're hosting a meeting and I have to submit something, okay, that's a little bit more doable than I'm managing. Right now, Ken, I am managing a first annual charity 5K for our PTC. Holy smokes, is there a lot of work that when I did that evaluative process, I didn't see all the work that was going to go into it. But it's something I care about. I'm okay digging 3 or 4 hours a week into it because it helps my school, but it's also on a topic that I care about. So I don't know if I answered your question. I don't have really a checklist, but there are definitely some initial things that you have to at least consider before you dive into the weeds, and know that if they say, oh, it'll be like an hour a week or 20 minutes a week, expect it to be 2, 3, 4 times that. That's just the nature of trying to get help on passion projects related to school.
I agree. The most important thing is that you care about it. And, it's a quote I've mentioned who knows how many times on this podcast, but it has stuck with me. Show 3, Red Oldham. You can't teach in a style that is not you. You can't do something just because someone else does it. You have to teach in the way that you're comfortable and confident. And it's kind of the same thing. Like, you shouldn't be jumping into things that you're not excited about. But there are those situations where they need somebody to step up, and that's a little bit different. I think it's important to look at what are the responsibilities and what are you going to give up. The reality is when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, and is saying yes to that saying no to something more important. Look at the kids that it's going to impact if that's most important to you. It doesn't have to necessarily be something you're interested in, but the impact on the kids could be the thing that you're interested in, and that could be your motivation to do it. I just to circle back what I said in the beginning, I think it's really important to evaluate what's going on outside of your school life, and can you take that on or not? What's it going to do to your health, your mental health? All of those are factors to consider. But I think it's important to look at what's the end game. Is it a 1-year commitment? Are you building a program? Are you like this 5K? Is it, you said it's the first annual, so what's your annual responsibility going to be? And then also just look at kind of how you operate on a daily basis. Are you being most efficient with your time, or could this be an opportunity to clean up your operations so that you really won't be working more? You'll be working a little bit more efficiently. So I think those are all important considerations. What is something, and maybe there's not, but I'll kind of open it up to this. What is something that you took on similar to this 5K, a whole lot of work, but year 2, it wasn't too bad. And maybe year 3 or year 4, it was kind of moving and grooving, and it wasn't a lot of responsibility, but you were still creating the same opportunity for impact on students. Does that make sense?
Totally. So the big shift that I made with my responsibilities is I wanted to realign with my teaching purpose. And my teaching purpose was having as much of an impact on as many kids' lives as possible. And initially, that was, oh, I've got a puppy joining us. Initially, that was my 6 learning support kids that were joining in my room in a building of 500. And I felt like I wasn't reaching enough. So that's why I was doing ski club and I was doing skating club and anything and everything that I possibly got invited to do. I felt honored to do that. It then shifted from that into things that I really wanted to do. And I'll give an example. I run as part of our PBIS, Positive Behavior Intervention Support. I'm on that committee as well as being on a committee for this 5K, as well as being on a committee related to um, responsive classroom and literally anything in school community. So that included me being in charge of almost quarterly assemblies, videos that got sent out to the entire school. I ended up kind of creating this mascot persona of myself. And that was what I was wanting. You know, not for the vanity side of things, but I was kindergarten students knew of me and my 6th graders still were interacting with me. And so when I was having an impact saying, hey, we're going to demonstrate how to behave at the beginning of the school year, or we're going to bring some holiday cheer, or we're going to do March Madness through a book exchange and we're going to get all into it, that, you know what, those 3 hours to build a silly video with colleagues that we would laugh and be creative with, and then to watch the kids' faces and hear about the buzz afterwards, you know, those are the type experiences that I realized every moment I was putting in was worth it. Taking 4 kids to a ski resort to ski on Friday nights, that was definitely a more personal benefit. I loved skiing and getting my ski pass paid for and hanging out with cool kids that wanted to do that as well. It wasn't aligned with what I was really hoping to do. And so I think you can be a little more specific. But the one thing that I'll say is you'll get very early on people that want to take their responsibilities off their plates. And so sometimes it feels like, oh, they trust me to take this on. I feel honored to take this on. I took on a lot of things because people are willing to spread the wealth. Um, it will shift if you are choosy, and if you do a good job, it will shift to being sought after for opportunities that actually match, that are meaningful. So even if it's something silly, it is an opportunity to prove how dedicated you are for when it really matters. um, Getting chosen to go to conferences to represent the district, going to build materials and meet with other school districts and government officials. Those type of things come as part of being an active member of a school community.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me with things that got easier was the studio that I kind of built up and led for, I think, about 5 years. So our school had absolutely no video announcements, and my principal said, "I'm getting you an iPad. I'm getting you a tripod. I want video announcements. I'm going to give you a corner of the library. I'm going to paint it green for you." And so, I took that and ran with it. And from the beginning, I said to myself, which is, if you've listened to us at all, you've heard this many times, I wanted the students to be in as much control as possible. And so the first year, obviously, it was figuring out the technology, figuring out the systems. But by year's end, I had that completely run by students. My job was to be there. My job was to manage behaviors, was to, yell at them and say, "Hey, we only have 15 minutes left. Like, let's get focused." But they ran it from communicating, controlling the cameras, reading the scripts, editing everything. And as the year started to wind down, I realized how much less work I was doing and how much more work I was going to have to do when all my fifth graders left and I had a new class of fifth graders. And so I came up with a brilliant idea of hiring fourth grade interns. And so I put out applications and the kids applied. And I told the fourth grade teachers, put the stars on the great leaders. I don't care if they don't know how to turn on a computer. I want the leaders. I want the responsible ones. And so I would take on these fourth graders, and they would spend the last month and they would learn the ropes. Beginning of next year, they started with me right away. Then I would open it up to more fifth graders. And, I was starting on day one where I was on day, 180 the previous year. And, just coaching the kids and saying you have one responsibility, that this product is better when you leave than when you started. And so by year 5, the things that they were doing were much better than year 1, and it was built upon the previous students. Uh, when I was in the middle of it, I thought I was going to leave the classroom to be a coach, or at least apply to be one, and it ended up being a mid-year position that I didn't want to leave the classroom mid-year. But it got me to realize that although it was very student led, if I left, it crumbled, because I was I was orchestrating and I was the general. And so I started to really look at how can I document everything? How can I track everything? And then who can I bring on with me? And it took me a couple of years to find someone willing to take it on and to do it with me. But, seeing that it's thriving now, and honestly, I think it's better than when I was there, is like one of the coolest things to see it still going on, knowing I'm not there at all. Seeing that, the systems are in place and someone took it and ran with it. And so, if you're building something, if you're starting a club, if you're participating in student leadership, student council, different things, like really look at how can you systemize it so that it's less stressful for you, but also know that if it's something you're really proud of, that someone's going to continue with it. So like this 5K you're talking about, you can't systemize it year 1, but after you get through it, year 2, document everything. So in year 4, when you leave, when you don't want to do it anymore, someone else can take it over and run it turnkey, and then look at it and see exactly how you did and say, oh, I can do this different, I can do that different, and it's going to be even better now. And that's the ultimate goal with what we're doing with students is trying to create something that grows and thrives and continues to build up the culture of the school.
I think that's a huge point, and I know that I didn't actually answer your question, but I love what you're
It's okay, you
saying,
never
and
do.
I know that. But at the end of it, what you're saying is you want sustainability, you want structure, and you want the experience to be available for all kids, and for you to
And
not
just
be a factor that.
sustainable for yourself.
Yeah,
If it's a stressful thing the first time, you can't keep it stressful. You gotta find a way to make it more manageable.
and I felt like, one of the big things is if you are trying to advertise kids to come do something with you, if you're putting a lot of emphasis in that, then you're probably a part of something that's not meant to be successful. You're dragging that success, and there's going to be hard times and more fun times than work. But if you feel and the kids feel like you're trying to convince them to be a part of it, okay, that might be part of your evaluative process. What you're talking about, Ken, is a situation that kids can't wait to be fifth graders so they can be a part of it. And I have different examples of that. We had a girls in STEM club that we had a very similar situation set up with, where they would kind of lean into it. As fourth grade, even instructionally, we would invite the third graders up and we would co-teach lessons where the kids were teaching and doing projects and showcasing, and the third graders were ranking and rating and these type of things. This is academic, not necessarily extracurricular, but that made them super excited for their opportunity to be in that role, which leads into that sustainability. And it doesn't matter what the content is. I think that's what I've learned the most. The content doesn't matter. It's the structure and the safeguards for success. That's probably what I learned the most from doing these extracurriculars. I'll give you an example. I moved schools and I ran a running club because my previous elementary school when I was a learning support teacher, I was doing Girls on the Run. Now, Girls on the Run, at least around us, has a cap of 15 kids per team. It doesn't go over that, maybe 18 for like 4 or 5 coaches. It's an incredible kind of breakdown of numbers. And I was like, you know what? Our school, I can't bring Girls on the Run quite yet. Maybe we'll do it a little bit later, but our kids even interested. I'm going to do a Salisbury Running Club. And I sent out an invitation and I said, you know what? Not just anyone who wants to participate in 3rd through 5th grade can participate, or 6th grade. They just open up to 6th grade, can participate. I had 56 kids show up to Salisbury Run Club. And legitimately for 6 weeks, we ran twice a week, and parents came, picked up the kids after school hours. And we ended only losing 3 kids because it was a fun, awesome experience. We ended with a 5K. Boy, oh boy, did my structure change from the first meeting, saying that, hey, this is my thought about it, to, oh my goodness, we have to manage 54 kids. Oh, our principal wants us to have a sign out sheet to make sure that they all go home. Oh my goodness, what happens if a parent doesn't come up? These type things all came out of that wisdom of, oh, I probably should have thought about that moment. And you log it away, so the next time you do it, you have already worked through those challenges and things to consider, which I think are really helpful. And it makes you look like you're wise at a young age to think of all the FAQs, if you will. But to lead into the next part, I know a big portion of this is, as I mentioned, these unwritten responsibilities. And I know that we have responsibilities that are written in our contract, but we as educators hear about, we're a part-time instructor, we're a part-time social worker, we're a part-time nurse, we're a part-time coach, we're all, we're part-time parents sometimes, right? All those features can feel really overwhelming. When talking about those unwritten, hey, you're going to need to come into a teaching role, and it's going to be so much more than just teaching instruction and dealing with behaviors. What is kind of your scope and sequence of balancing your responsibility as an educator? And I say that more so as entering master educator phase, that I'll say this year is the first year that I'm taking on a student teacher. It's the absolute first time that I could have taken one on. I feel like I would have learned through that. But I, at 13 years in, felt like I'm finally at the place to say my stuff is in order to advise someone to be a successful teacher. And that's a big unwritten, you kind of feel like it's the right thing to do to teach the next generation. But there's other unwritten things, even within your own school community. You're a 13-year-old, you're veteran teacher, and new teachers come into the building. You kind of show them the ropes. You may not be their advisor. How do you balance that? What are some of those unwritten things, and how do you manage those yourself? Because you know what, you can very easily get caught with a new teacher feeding them everything you need to survive day in and day out, almost coddling them or enabling them.
It's tough. They're, like you said, new teachers, maybe running professional development sessions for your district, your school, after school workshops, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of that, unwritten rules. We do a lot of professional development as coaches, and one of my biggest passions is trying to coach up or just encourage teachers to run the sessions. I like to always have a teacher with me, because they can kind of speak to the community a little bit more. They can pull on classroom examples, different things. But it's, trying to encourage them to do that, and feeling that, not responsibility, but not even that obligation, but that opportunity So there are a lot of those things, and teaching is hard. And I tell teachers all the time that there is not a harder job in the district than being a classroom teacher. People look at other responsibilities, and being a principal is incredibly difficult. Being a coach, it does have its challenges at times, but I tell them hands down, being a classroom teacher is so much harder than being an instructional coach. With that being said, how do you evaluate, how do you balance? I think it's really important for teachers to look at their daily operations of themselves, of their classrooms, and try to find ways to be more efficient, to buy yourself time. And that comes with, kind of like I was saying, year 2, year 3 of running a program, year 2, year 3 of running a classroom. How can you find ways to be more efficient, to put more on the students, to get them to buy in more, but also to kind of share their responsibilities? So actually, just today, I was working with a teacher who, English teacher, provides feedback on writing pieces, wants the students to find value in the feedback that's provided, wants them to listen to it, wants them to utilize it. And so my first step was I showed them what Mote is, MOTE. If you've never heard of this, it's a Google extension that allows you to, when you make a comment on a Google Doc, instead of typing it, you can record audio directly into the comment box. It's great, super efficient. And so we started there, and he said grading papers was much more efficient. It was much easier for him to just record a comment than type it. Awesome. Now we get to the phase of students looking at that feedback. So we created a lesson where the students have to fill out kind of a graphic organizer. What did the teacher give as strengths and weaknesses? What questions do I still have? And now the next writing piece, they're going to use that to make sure that they don't make the same mistakes, that they continue to do the things that they're working on. And when he goes to grade, he's going to look at that organizer that the students created, and then he can look at their future writing pieces to see if they use it. So I share this example because all of that he used to do. And we put most of the responsibility on the students, but also found a way that they found value in it. And so, I think it's important, like Matt, when you're opening yourself up to a student teacher, what are systems you've created to become more efficient, to have more time to run a class and to mentor a student teacher? You, in theory, I would hope you're going to put in the same number of hours with your student teacher as you did maybe year 2. You're not going to be putting in year 2 hours plus the additional hours of mentoring a new teacher. And so, I think when taking on those unwritten rules, it's a great way to look at your own stuff and say, how have I become more efficient? Or, what are systems that I have in place that allow me to have things happen a little bit more automatic? Or what are ways that I've kind of passed the responsibility to share with the students to buy myself back more time to plan more creative lessons or to take on the responsibilities of mentoring someone?
I think it's a good point. As I enter this new world, I think that advice of not getting carried away with the number of hours, it's not this on top of what I'm already doing, but that there's efficiency and systems in place. And I think the the intrigue of taking on a student teacher is to put those systems to
I'm
test.
jealous.
Yeah,
I
I,
never
I'm
had a
I'm really
student
excited.
teacher.
Well, and it's one of those things that we hear horror stories as educators of, and the the real reason why I held off so long is as a fourth year teacher, I'd received tenure, and so I was allowed to have people come in, and I wasn't going to have a student teacher, but I had an early field placement come in, and I had two prospective teachers early in their educational career in college that came in to my classroom and were more interested in talking to each other and very little interest in being in our class and learning from the class. And I was very off put from that. And I realized that a freshman who's prospectively wanting to be a teacher is different than a senior who's preparing to their career to be an instructor and invested in the classroom, but that stunted my willingness to have something come in. But I am very much looking forward, much like this podcast and other podcasts I listen to look at things in a more critical way. And I myself learn how can I make my systems, uh, I guess, assess how my systems are and then make adjustments and improvements as it's not going to be linear. And we'll see how it goes. I have a great candidate. His name's Mr. Wiggins, and we hope to have him on the podcast at some point along the way. Um, there are a few things I'd like to adjust immediately. He said he's scared of fourth graders. His favorite are like kindergarten age kids. And so I had him join our class for a virtual hello. And I gave him the opportunity to revise that answer and just say, hey, I'm excited to be there. He's like, no, I'm a little intimidated. I was like, that's not how you introduce yourself to 9-year-olds. But that's part of the learning process, right? And we heard it. I can't remember the guest. You might recall it better. That in my classroom and in education is a very cheap to free way to learn very valuable lessons. And so I know it was referenced as part of the students in a high school environment, but even mentoring teachers, you know, Mr. Wiggins is going to come in and it's a very easy way, quick way, safe way to make some adjustments and change perspectives that hopefully will change his trajectory. Hopefully he doesn't want to run away from fourth graders. It's fine if he wants to teach kindergarten or primary, but um, I have a feeling it'll turn out just fine.
Yeah, absolutely. He's under great mentorship for sure.
We'll see.
So to close things out, let's kind of circle back to a call to action here. What's one piece of advice for educators in terms of evaluating those extra responsibilities? How do they make that decision, or what advice would you have just in general for their feelings of perhaps feeling obligated, but also taking a step back and doing what's best for themselves?
We as educators view ourselves as service members more than we do business people. And business people have a great pace or pulse on this ROI, return of investment. And I think that it's okay to have a perspective of return of investment. And obviously, the investment is not going to change your financial situation unless it is master's classes, which I would say try to finish your master's as soon as possible. It's the best way to get uh, paid what maybe we deserve. But that return of investment may just be familiarity and comfort in your classroom with the kids you already have. Going to a soccer match here, going to a basketball game here, going to a flute performance here. That is great return on investment, even if it's one or two kids at a time. That's okay to give up one day for. Jumping right in and saying, I'm going to go and coach 5 days a week for 4 hours a day may not be a great return on investment. You can be an assistant coach or try to figure that out. I'm not discouraging that. But like anything, listen to your body. You can sleep on it. You can take some time. Don't just jump at it. See if you're tense, if you're actually interested, and it's okay to say no. There are going to be plenty of other times that you can say yes. And if you say no and then you revisit and you're like, hey, I actually kind of want to check that out, I'm sure they'll still take you. I'm sure there's still place for you to have a part in that role. So that's what I would suggest. What would you suggest?
I think that was great. I think it was a great analogy. I would say two things. Look at what's needed from the school. Is it your time to step up? Do you need to do it for others when others did it for you, or is it your opportunity or time to step back and put your time and efforts and obligations towards other facets of your life? And two, if it's something that you're hesitant of because of the amount of time, but you are super passionate about it, or you feel that you can really help support it or help take it into a great direction, then be very clear with your expectations. Whether it's to your principal or to someone else you're doing it with, that, I want to do this, I want to support, but I can't be the lead, or I can only put in X amount of time during this, specific date range. So when I moved to elementary schools, the conversation kind of came up about growing a studio there. And I said, I will support it. I will help put all the pieces in place, but I cannot be the person leading it. That is not my responsibility. I had already had my son. My daughter was on the way. I knew it wasn't the right thing for me to do. Plus, I was teaching a brand new program for the district. So I was involved in getting the program started, but I said from the beginning, I am not leading this. There has to be somebody else that can step up, and somebody else did, and it was a great time for them. So I think it's important to know where you're at and set those clear expectations for it. So Matt, I'll let you add another thought, and then you can close down shop for us.
Yeah, I think the other thing that as you're saying that is when you can do two things: enter a problem with some solution. It may not be the right solution, but a solution is always helpful. But the other thing is, even if you can't be the legwork, maybe you're not great at structure, maybe you're not great at being creative, but you have something else to contribute. You can easily get into a group of people that want to make that time at school super memorable for kids. And that's every step along the educational journey. I want, what my kids deserve to have not only a great time in my classroom, but a school-wide pride. And middle school, they should enjoy the dances and the extracurriculars. They should have that opportunity. And high school should be able to be a part of these clubs. We feel that responsibility because our memories of school many times are not opening up the textbook and reading these pages. It's these interactions with friends and staff and opportunities, trips, field trips, these type of things. So while it's tough and you do have to value your time, also remember that, you know what, I only get to be in this grade level for 1 year from the student's perspective. And I deserve to have a great opportunity as a kid. And I want my kids in my room to have a great fourth grade year. And so much of that is beyond just being in my room. That is all those are extracurriculars. So if it's inconvenient, it's worth it. They deserve it. That's why we got into this profession. And I highly suggest, take one thing more onto your plate. Maybe it's a movie night. Maybe it's an extracurricular in the morning. Maybe it's just going to a specialist in your building and asking how can you help them see a future project turn bigger than they could do by themselves. Offering extra hands, going to the grocery store, those type of things make a huge difference and change the morale and the perspective of the school. So it's worth it. It's all worth it. That's why we got into this position, is to be all those other roles, to fulfill those unwritten responsibilities and to make an impact on kids. So with that being the case, and it being middle of January, listen to your body, do what you need to for yourself, stay healthy, stay safe. But anything more that you can give, I know kids are soaking up any sense of normalcy right now. So the more we can provide it, challenge yourself a little bit, not a lot of it, a little bit. But unless you have anything else to share,
Go for it, my friend.
we're going to power down this episode. Hopefully we leave you feeling powered up. Stay well, and we will talk to you next week.